Hi everyone, and welcome to Cyto Town Hall number 5. I'm Richard, and I'm here with David Lancashire, my co-founder. I think most people in the audience today, although we've seen great growing numbers, will have seen one of these before, maybe caught up with one of the recap videos or transcripts. So we're going to follow the basic format we've been using previously. But initially from me, a quick project status update running through the kind of big hallmark things that have happened over the last month or so since we last updated. And then we're going to get into Q&A. I mean, we've launched a roadmap. We've got some significant stuff coming through this month. I'm sure there's lots of questions people have to ask. Feel free to use the ask a question button and also to upvote questions you're interested in. That really helps us give some structure. It's a cool part of the way these things work. Gives some structure to getting those answered, making sure we're actually getting people, the information that they're hoping to get out of the session. The other thing I'll say is we'll probably ignore some and flag to you when we do, just because I'm guessing there'll be some repeats from previous town halls and some general questions. Don't take it the wrong way if we do that. You'll be able to find responses like that either from the Telegram group, just by asking or by chatting to people in the community, or by going and reviewing one of the previous sessions. So I'm just flagging that because it's a real balance we have to do for people who've been, kind of keeping up with the project all the way through, making sure that things aren't repetitive for them, at the same time making sure we're answering people's questions when they come up. So please, bear with us if we're not answering your exact question. We'll try and pick the most interesting set of things for the community that give people the best update and sense of where we're at. Having said that, let me just drop straight into the kind of month in review. It's been about a month, maybe 5 weeks since the last town hall. And as usual, it's fantastic to have such a great long laundry list of stuff that's come up in the last month that we've gone through it. It's always easy to forget just how much is going on. And I think the big theme for this last month has to be kind of community. Been a fantastic ride for both David and I think, just in that the engagement from the community has been huge, and that's been given a real sense of buzz to the team and to us. It's filled me with a lot more kind of vigor and excitement again, just from having so many people asking in-depth questions and taking a real interest in the project. We've seen from that social, the things we measure, social engagement, just how many people are talking on Twitter and Telegram and stuff. We've seen that go up, and that's a nice metric, and exchanges look at that and things, by the way. But much more important, I think we've seen that matched with output from the community really contributing things. And so there's a couple of things I really wanted to call out around that. Probably number one was a couple of contributions from 0x Luminous. Mad guy, what a fantastic set of things he's done. I've caught up with him in the interim. First of all, was a really nice piece. David and I have talked about it. One of the better concise takes on Cyto we've ever seen, called The Zen of Cyto. Look it up if you haven't seen it and you're interested in the project. It's from a non-founder, non-project person, but a really solid take on what we're about for someone who knows what he's talking about. And then another little thing Luminous did was create a little portal on GitHub of just resources he'd found as he was researching the project, etc. Fantastic resource for the community. Love that he did that, and we'll be trying to add stuff ourselves. Not sure if we'll take it over as a project official thing or leave it in his hands, but I'll try and get some more things up there. Maybe share some Google Docs and things that weren't shared originally to contribute to that. We've also started seeing people just writing and doing more things about the project. Crypto Wombat had a really nice, concise piece to his community about the project. We've had some community efforts to kind of edit and improve various aspects of the white paper, which started off just as an effort from someone to kind of get to understand it, which was lovely. And he started sort of checking with us if he was understanding things correctly, and we'll see where that goes in terms of an alternate or a light paper or wherever. People have been starting to look at contribute ideas to the website and things like that, and we're getting together, looking at community-based project around that as well. And kind of last but not least on that frame, we've had record numbers on the arcade as well. So if people haven't noticed that, we've had a record number of game transactions and increasing the last few weeks. So I think what that shows is a kind of melding of our ongoing efforts with new community outreach kind of gripping together and starting to take us another level up as a project. A couple of quick other shout outs. Green Weenie in the community organized an AMA for me with a community he's part of called Crypto Aces. Can recommend those guys. It's one of the best AMAs I've ever done in terms of question quality and engagement from the group. Really enjoyed that, and we're hoping to translate that into getting David onto their podcast, which I think is scheduled later this month.
We got Attila Era, great guy.
Yep.
He also got off the BSV show, and I think it was a good discussion. It was like 80% good and 20% me ranting. But
so that's up on YouTube. That was on Crypto Bits, BITZ, if you're after that. So I was going to make a shout out to those guys as well for having us there. And that's been part of a kind of really interesting connection we've been making with parts of the BSV community as well there. And the last thing I wanted to shout out, and we'll look at getting more public access to this for everyone, but we've had some non-English groups starting up. Forming both Telegram groups, but then also groups of people doing translation on key materials and those sorts of things. I'm seeing some questions come up in the chat. If you can head over to ask a question, that's a better place to put those so we get them in a list and we can remember to answer things. Things will get lost in chat. So thanks for the questions, but yeah, try and drop them in the ask a question. Kind of continuing the wrap up. It's quite a long one today, which is great. Partnerships. One thing that's gone kind of unnoticed because of all the stuff that's been achieving, but we're now listed in the Ime Messenger, which is a Telegram alternative. It's using using Telegram network, but it's a different client, and it lets you send Cyto to your friends and family and other people by Telegram address, which is kind of fun. I haven't actually set it up yet. I had to play with the prototype. That's kind of nice. Just a little feature for people who are interested in doing that, and also just to get the word out there. And we also did a guest appearance on an AMA with our partners in the Crust Network. That seems like about a month ago, I think, and that was just a really nice chance to get out in front of a different audience, a different space. People mostly interested in storage, which was interesting. Big project updates. Look, it seems to go on and on, but there really are a lot of things I want to get in here. The PancakeSwap Community Liquidity Program went live. Last I checked, we had about 25-30 million Cyto moved across. That's now starting to go both ways. So that's, again, care of another partnership with AnySwap. That program is currently returning about 125% per annum, the APR rather. That's really good. What that's showing is that I think the project has a lot of legs. And the way that's working is we're guaranteeing a minimum. We monitor that daily, and if that goes down, we'll come in and make sure that everybody can always move their tokens on the pair. But our plan is to get out the way and let the community provide most of the liquidity there. And at these kind of APRs, what it shows is with the daily volumes on PancakeSwap, there's significant room for community to come in, provide liquidity, and get a really decent return on their tokens. And we know that's important for some people in the community, and that's the main reason, along with cheaper transactions, that we put the effort into getting that to happen. And it's been great to see that picking up. We dropped down last Friday to about 30% of the liquidity, and I think this Friday we'll be adjusting down again, hopefully even more than that. Shout out again to the Relay X guys in the BSV space. They've started doing something very similar over there. We've had good take up there with people coming into the Cyto space through Relay X. And we've also been listed on a minor exchange on Bitrue this last month. It's almost easy to forget these listings, but these are constantly coming along, and I think they are also putting pressure. All these things are putting pressure on the big boys to pay attention to us in ways that we'd like to interact with them. Getting on to kind of more general things, we did have a roadmap update earlier this month, and we'd really like to open the floor up to questions on all aspects of that. I think we'll definitely get some questions about the Rust on the network kind of aspect of things. And we're happy to explain where that's at, what we're doing there, how that's coming along. That's a big part of what we've been doing this last month, and we've got good progress to show there. And the other thing that's really come out of that is it's clarified for us, just the scope of what we're trying to do, and with the state of the project where it is, the finances being solid, and the community sort of coming behind us, we're really looking towards hiring to build out our teams and to improve just sort of how well we're tracking on that roadmap and how quickly we can hope to achieve those things. Specifically, we had this month cemented game and product sort of front end dev, someone who's going to come in on the arcade side of things and really work on upping our game there, so to speak. And we have a top flight product manager from Red Hat experience and other places coming in to kind of help those development teams, help us sort of streamline what we're doing, tie goals to development and that sort of thing better, and also just to kind of ramp up and be able to expand the team more without having kind of key founder type bottlenecks and things on major parts of the project. We also have 2 significant development hires out there, and once we've got those in place, I think we'll be probably going back and looking at more community and other kind of hires along the way. Specifically, I'm starting to think around being able to coordinate all of this great input we're getting from the community, but to actually kind of make sure that people who are contributing to the process have a good experience and get rewarded, and kind of becoming part of the project that way. So that's really, end to end a pretty busy month, and I think rounds it out. I'm not sure if David has anything he wants to jump in on, or if we'll just go direct to questions from here.
Let's just do questions. I thought that was the best part last time, and I'm sure what people will ask about, we'll talk about it. Like, it's kind of crazy actually listening to you, just because there is actually, it's kind of crazy how much has happened in the last 5 weeks. I don't even know, was it 5 weeks ago we did this?
Yeah, it was November 3, so we just basically 5 weeks exactly.
Anyway, okay, let's get to questions.
I know we're constantly frustrated by the things that are left on the to-do list at the end of the day, and it's great. I kind of indulge a little bit in that read-through because it's really nice to be able to get in front of a group of people and remind them and ourselves what we've done.
You didn't even mention milestone 2, which is super important, I think, as well.
Well, yes, we did. Yes, we did. So quickly, we also completed milestone 2, which completes our Polkadot ecosystem grant, and also kind of forges the way for some of the work in the roadmap we mentioned around integration of cryptocurrencies in general in future. Yes, I did miss that, and that's one of the key things we got done this month as well. Cool. Should we launch into questions? I see one from friend Marcus, which has been upvoted a few times on the fees on the network. Did you want to take that one, David? Or?
I mean, we have no idea what fee prices will be. What we know is that, we know that the fee that you pay is not just paying for mining and staking, it's paying for the supporting ancillary services. And we know that it depends on how many routing hops you're sending. So you can have an agreement with a first hop node and be like, I'm going to give you these really low fees. I'm going to allow you to hoard them because you're going to build them up, and then every now and then you're going to produce a block. And then maybe it's going to take 20 hours for you to do that. But I'm okay with that. I want you to be hoarding. We can also have, I'm going to pay a much higher fee, and I'm going to insist on it propagating through the network until it hits a mempool that can very quickly produce a block. That depends on what the user wants. The fact that we can't have these conversations in proof of work and proof of stake is kind of one of the problems. So, what will fees be? We don't know. It also depends. I mean, to me, I think the big question is not what will fees be. We know that in routing networks, they'll be lower than in other networks per byte, adjusted for the fact we've got the routing SIGs. So there's a little bit extra there, but we've worked out the math and it's lower overall anyway. The big question we've got is, how do permission chains compete against open ones? Or maybe how open chains compete against permission ones? Because there's no way we're going to be cheaper than Amazon Coin. Because Amazon Coin is going to be a proof of stake setup running on their own infrastructure, maybe with Google participating or something, and it's going to be round robin around people producing blocks from a database. They don't need to hash. They're not going to be paying for stakers. You know, if they're not offering guarantees of data services that we need to pay for as well, that's going to be the dirt cheap way of doing things. So I think the question with fees is, we're looking, well, there are reasons why Saito is going to be cheaper than other open public blockchains, but I don't think that's the point of competition. Like, the point of competition in openness is you don't get entrenched interest that then gradually force the fees up, right? Like, if you've only got, you remember, Richard, Bobby Lee was talking about like what Bitcoin miners were doing. You remember the details?
Yeah.
It's stuff like, you know, if you've got a small cartel of people who are producing, they can play games to force you to raise your fees. We know that some people have been actually doing this on various BTC networks, flooding the mempool with stuff to kind of game algorithms and, you know, and push people's fees up because it's beneficial for them. With a really open network, you can't do that. You also don't do things like, you don't pay the TAL tax, which is one of the things that's kind of happening on BSV. If you look, you'll see that like the stock in the company is going up, even as the price of the token is going down. Well, what is that? That's because they're taking a lot of business and they're moving it into this off-chain dynamic where you don't even need to buy the token to engage that way. You know, it's not an easy question. I think for me, what the strategic concern for me is how we position ourselves to compete against networks like Google Coin. They're going to be passing themselves off as advanced, sophisticated versions of Bitcoin, and where permissioned is good enough because they're like, oh, we're a blockchain. Oh, we're a DAG, so we're open. And, you know, if they've got 3 people playing and they're round robining around it, like, is that actually the case? Fee-wise, my guess is will be 25% more expensive than them, but probably about 50% less expensive than Bitcoin, you know, a proof of work at the same scale per byte. Richard?
Yeah, I think I've mused over this as well, and I think the thing to me is that it's going to be something like, the fees will be in a market, something like you can see in, say, cloud hosting provision, right? That it's just going to be a simple market for how expensive is it to bring compute to bear running on the Cyto network, and what kind of revenue streams can you get out of servicing that. And node operators will be in strict competition, so whoever can do it the cheapest and most efficient is going to win the lion's share of the block making, and you know, and therefore be end up in the most chains, get the most money. And what that will mean for users is there's a really hard downward pressure on the price, you know, on the margin for those providers. So those providers will be looking at everything they can do to be as efficient as possible, and that's really all we can do for you. Reasonably, we can say that if you look at some things that are comparable, like running a website and funding it through Google advertising and providing the infrastructure underneath it, then it's going to be probably several multiples, 2 to 5 times more expensive than running a flat website now. But when you look at things like advertising revenue, that's going to be going at 50 to 80% to the user to use to pay for that, rather than 2% or the 1% of that advertising revenue that goes to running websites now. So if you look at it from that kind of business analyst's perspective, the end result for users is going to be significantly cheaper, both than, as David said, comparable chains, but also it's going to be competitive at some level with Web 2. And that's really critical, and probably more critical in terms of fees, because that allows the current models that make revenue for those big companies to pay directly to users to fund the network.
I don't think it's a question we win engaging. It feels like TPS. It's kind of like sharding. like people wander into Telegram and they're like, oh, sharding is the solution because it lets us be decentralized. It's like, well, if you're sharding, you're literally reducing the decentralization of data. But people are like, that's okay because it's sharding. And it's like, no, you haven't solved the scalability trilemma. You are literally reducing decentralization of the data because instead of being on 1,000 nodes, it's now on 5. I kind of feel like it's the same thing with transaction fees because it's going to be like, why is BSC cheaper? Because it's much closer to being a permission chain, running on like a big database. Do you get like, I don't know if people like the EOS thing, I don't know. I heard, I actually don't know if this is true, but I heard at the very beginning from someone who I think knew it was true that like originally they had like 5 copies of the blockchain, which were in fact on one server with 5 NIC cards. That was basically designed to kind of game the system. But yeah, you know, I don't think realistically transaction fees also depend on usage. So I think strategically in terms of growth, we're better to focus on getting people using the chain, and whatever fees are, we'll be able to grow from there. You know, like if fees get really high, what it does is it pushes use cases off, but it also means you've got more use cases coming on. So like things like the arcade, we're publishing a lot of data, and the growth strategy for that is as fees rise, we take some of that on-chain data and we move it off-chain, and the on-chain stuff shrinks to the SIG transfers. So there's kind of a growth strategy there too, but we can reduce the size of the stuff on-chain to reduce fees as we grow. Richard?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that moves into other stuff we could talk about, because I think there's from there's really interesting things to talk about around on-chain, off-chain balance and how people develop applications that work on the blockchain and how they can judiciously use on-chain data for things that need universal broadcast, and what the features that you really want from a decentralized network are versus things that you can do off-chain. And you know, that's a whole big discussion, but I think maybe to give some of the other questions a chance,
let's move on. I mean, yeah, let's try to get through them more quickly, and then if people have follow-up, that's good.
Yeah, I think if I hop in on the next one, that's in terms of what are plans to engage developers. I think the first stage is tightening up the roadmap and development in-house and scheduling things like working on an SDK and those sorts of things, which we're really cognizant we need. At the same time, you're kind of building out our own infrastructure and our own standards around how we work as an open project, et cetera, to make sure that people can contribute in all sorts of different ways, whether they're wanting to build something independent or contribute to the project as a whole. And then I think as well, it comes down to staffing. So these are, I'm starting to put things together in my head, and you know, I've actually got a list of things to discuss with David, the kind of planning stuff toward the end of the week about thinking about who we need around that, because it's both development resources, but then we also probably need someone, if you look at Canonical, Red Hat in the open source space, but then also anyone who's building, you know, say a Zapier who builds like APIs for developers out there, those people will all have someone who's a developer advocate type role, who's there to help make sure those programs are working, et cetera. And I think that's clearly within the scope of what the project should be handling. One thing I can say about that is just the uptick in interest in the last month is making us look at bringing that sort of stuff forward. We'd possibly, I mean, let's say it's modesty, been thinking that might be further away than it's now looking as being sort of viable, and so we're needing to add to that in our planning. Exact plans there, I think, will be around, you know, making sure the tools are there, making sure the people are there to work with, and the documentation, etc., is all up to speed. And then what's different with us is we'll also be looking at that plan around in the roadmap, the real economy side of things, about how we're getting ready on the token side of things to work with people. And our first big step toward that is the ability to easily integrate other cryptocurrencies into platforms. That's kind of my really top level vague answer, because that's really where we're at, I think, overall. David, did you have anything to add on that?
Not unless there's another follow-up question. Let's keep going. Cool. And I mean, if you guys didn't get an answer, push another one on.
Yep.
You want me
Cool.
to
Then,
take the next one?
yeah, if you could.
Here's what, okay, so the question is about the roadmap, distribution and burn plans. What factors do we expect to influence how tokens are distributed or burned? Yeah, okay. Right off, we've pushed this out until we've got zero token inflation, because one of the things that we need is we bring the mainnet tokens online, right? Like we've got the ERC20 and the BEEP and this stuff, and what it's supposed to be doing is exchange integration, allowing us to easily integrate with other parts of the crypto ecosystem, and also take care of distribution, because distribution is a really hard issue for us if you understand consensus. So it gives us a head start on this, right? Like people are going to come and they're going to be like, and I think we see them in Telegram too, they're like, oh my gosh, token distribution. It's like, well, it's happening. What we think is going to happen is, as the mainnet stuff comes on, we think there's going to be a risk premium in pricing. So nodes that are on mainnet and are dealing with mainnet tokens are not going to be able to really easily get those mainnet tokens back into the ERC20 space. And so one of the reasons, like a lot of people, I don't think they're thinking about this in the sense that people want us to, for clarity's sake of their own decisions, they want us to be like telling people exactly how tokens will flow out, on what schedule, on what dates, and this sort of thing for mainnet. And it's like, actually, one of the things we need to do is we need to have a strategy that makes sense so that we can leverage the risk premium to drive on-chain activity. And that depends on things like the transaction volume we have and the level of security of the network, because the cost of attack is what's going to determine ultimately the how secure on-chain transfers end up being. So what factors do we expect to influence? One, what transaction volume is. So we're looking particularly at the Web3 crypto stuff and how we can get usage up from that. Here's another factor. We know that we want to use an advertising faucet, right? So what we want to do is we're using zero fee transactions for a lot of stuff. So transaction fees are basically nothing. And we're using that to get volume up. At a certain point, we're going to flick a switch and it's going to start costing people 0.0001 Saito or whatever, but they're going to have an ad module installed. And maybe the ad module is not even watching an ads. It's just, we know you're a real person because you've used the network for a while. So we're now switching you into fee mode and here you go. And we start trickling out the Saito to it that way. Well, we can't have that being gamed, because if we have that being gamed, then we've got basically proof of work on token distribution, which doesn't help us because it's not real users. It's kind of like a play to earn mechanism. So we don't want to commit to a token distribution for the advertising faucet until we know it's actually working with growth. So what we've given is we've given kind of like these pies, and we're saying, well, this is what's going to go here. This is what's going to go there. Like the foundation quadrant, I think it's 20%. We don't know we don't know what's going to happen now. We don't know how it's going to be managed yet. We know that the dev side, we've got something like 10% for partnerships, Richard.
Yeah.
Like, again, we don't necessarily know. Like for that kind of stuff, we're dependent on other people understanding and kind of coming to us. And if we get a good economy coming up, before we get people coming and saying, look, we'd love to participate, this is how we want to contribute value, there's no legitimate reason for us to give those tokens to anyone, especially if what it does is it hurts that risk premium and it hurts the growth model. What we want is we want the economics and the tokenomics to be incentivizing the ISP nodes. And the ISP nodes they're not necessarily like responding at the beginning to say to us money, right? Like it's a weak, probable form of money that can get converted because there's a risk premium on it, right? And so, what are we looking for? We're looking for the success of the network. And if you look at the roadmap, I think what you'll see every step before we say, look, we're going to nail this down. You're going to see us experimenting with it and building the software and trying to figure out what works. So that's why like for the next while, well, we've got staking, we've got the mechanisms working. The algorithms on the back end in the Rust core, some of them are not terribly scalable. But they're black boxed, and so we can scale them, right? Like we're using this data structure instead of that, and we know that that one's better, but this one's easier to debug. And it's the same thing with distribution, right? Like token persistence, one of the things we're thinking is we're going to start at a very high level. So people who have this amount of Saito on main chain, that's guaranteed. But if you've got a smaller amount, well, it's kind of like the Kusama reaping threshold, right? That's a form of offering persistence for big players like ISPs, while allowing us to experiment with things like the faucet and get that stuff working without committing to be maintaining token balances for people who have like 0.0006 on chain. So what factors are we looking at? We're looking at basically executing the strategic roadmap of getting growth. And the reason that we will be issuing tokens is because there's this good reason for us to be doing that. And the reason we won't be issuing tokens is because it doesn't help us. And I think long term, we've been clear about what we're aiming for in terms of the crypto space. We're not looking to kind of flood the market or do anything like that. But we're also not going to be fudded into like giving up our ability to set up an advertising faucet because some guys who like pump and dump on DeFi shitcoins are concerned that our tokenomics isn't clear. So it's walking the line between that. If people have specific questions, maybe a follow-up would be good. Richard?
Yeah, I think the real key thing to understand there is it's a bootstrapping problem. The economy needs to have active users who are paying real fees to create the value that the cats are on fire to create the value that will return value to the node operators in the system. But that means that the tokens have to have a cost. So we need to be introducing tokens through things like incentive programs, whether it's an advertising faucet or anything else, in a way that stimulates the economy but doesn't undermine the value of the tokens at all times. So that's got to be through very, very cautious use. And I think people can see through everything we've done, we're very cautious with tokens and not just throwing them around because we're really conscious of this economic problem. We have to make sure that the token value is there and sustained to reward people who are doing work for it. But we can't ask them to divest of their own tokens necessarily fully as that engine of growth. So it's really just splitting that line. And that's it's almost impossible. It's the sort of thing that blockchains try and do by hard coding stuff in on day one. That's not actually how it works. It's not how economics works. It will happen through watching growth and making sure that a few things are always happening, that we have increased volumes of traffic, that running nodes is becoming more profitable in real terms against fiat or node costs, etc., and that things are moving in the right direction. And we'll have to that'll have to be governed appropriately. That's not something you can say, right, well, we've crunched the numbers and the answer is 7. At this distance out, we're guessing.
Maybe give a practical example, which also kind of relates to the when Binance question that everyone asks, where Binance is represented the general class of exchanges that are centralized, right? Like those guys really want their pound of flesh. We'll see. Like we can bite the bullet on them if we need to, but why issue tokens to them? I think we're not going to need to. I think our roadmap is such that increasingly they'll be listing us on their own, and if we continue to execute properly, there's just no reason to flood the market with stuff like that. If that saves us money, I mean, burn them.
Well, I think
likewise, I think like the pace at which people understand Cyto, that's not really in our control. One of the things that really pleases me over the last 2 months is that I can now look out at the community, at you guys, and I know that people get it. I don't know when we had that change, Richard, but like there's a point where you look out and people are talking about Cyto and you just know they understand.
It's been, I mean, that's been the kind of that's the hallmark of this last month and a bit for me is the number of times skipping through Telegram, someone contacts us or whatever, and I see it might be a question directed at me or at us generally, but it might also just be
Richard's drops. For the record, I still get a lot of people who have no idea what Saito is. Am I online? Okay, great. Great questions, guys. Get the big ones in. Let's keep going. A question from Telegram. Why would Polkadot parachain projects prefer to use dApps on Cyto instead of something else? Okay, why? I mean, because you got to pay for that stuff, and there's no economic model in Polkadot to pay for them. So with Cyto, there's an economic model to get the infrastructure running, and the people that are running the infrastructure are now running the servers that have the NFTs and stuff. Maybe we'll get to the game stuff and talk about that a bit, but there are a bunch of game models that we're very interested in where the servers need to be running, like supporting NFTs or maintaining databases of cards and stuff. Cyto provides a really easy way to monetize that. I think that question is kind of assuming that there's an economic model that works in Polkadot. The nice thing about Polkadot is that I think people didn't get it until we talked to them at the Web3 Foundation. And then they're like, yeah, actually, this problem, maybe we need to work on it. So I think there's an opportunity for us. I will say that the Web3 milestone grant and stuff, because of the delay in the parachain, that's kind of why we've been holding off with DOT, because we don't think they're ready for a big marketing push with us. But we'll see. We'll see if Richard comes back, and we'll just keep going. Let's see. Will there be a noticeable increase in performance when Saito Rust Lite goes live on Saito.io? This is an interesting question because I'm going to give you the opposite answer. The answer is no. And the reason is that right now, Saito Lite Rust is a full block network. So this is the kind of thing that I think it's not really obvious to people when they're thinking about like, well, what we're doing and why and how things are happening. Because people are looking for like some big bang moment where like Rust, where the word kind of leaps off the screen into reality and suddenly you're getting like tetanus in your living room, but like number go up or something. It's not like that. We've got a software development schedule and we're trying to put out the software. And at the same time, we're kind of looking and we're seeing what's breaking. So we've got a lot of things that are faster. Like one of the huge things is that we've totally replaced anything that's JSON, which is the data goes in a string and the string gets sent. We've replaced it with binary channels. So even your browser is now communicating in binary. Huge speed up. On the other hand, our browsers are now communicating in binary as full block operators. So for things like doing the switch over to the live network, well, if we don't get that, like we need to add SPV mode back in order to get the browsers able to like sync super quickly. And then when a block is produced, they process the block and they do their own transactions very quickly. So this is the sort of thing we're looking at with deployment. We can share, I think we've got a URL for the test net we can share if people want. But it's not really terribly exciting unless you know what's happening. So I guess the answer to that is like yes and no. Some things are faster, some things are slower. And how it works in practice is, well, we're, flicking the switch and moving it over is when it's faster and better, because we don't want to be disrupting gaming and we don't want to be disrupting gameplay. So like, why would we do that? We can ask maybe specific questions about that. But in terms of the core nodes, in terms of the core servers, Rust is way faster. I think we've shared data on that before. But yeah, it's blazingly fast in terms of parallelization of data, which is what we need. Okay, does anyone want to ask any awkward questions before Richard comes back? No? Okay. When the time is right, what are the avenues you will pursue to market and get the word out about Cyto? We already are. A lot of people, I think they find out about us and they come in and they're like, when marketing? And it's like, well, you're here, right? I think I just dropped. We'll see. Am I here? Okay, I don't see myself. So we are doing marketing. We are doing marketing. It's kind of bounded by what's happening, right? Because like We've got people who are vesting. We've got people that are supposed to be contributing work and support in different forms. So some of it is dealing with them. Some of it is like arranging other things. We've been tasking up and growing, so there's a limited amount that we can do. I think the Red Hat guy who's coming on is going to be really important in freeing us up to do more. Personally, I think the big step for us with Reach Out is going to be when we get the Web3 crypto stuff up, because I think the marketing stuff that's worked best for us is stuff that's focused on what we can do. I think the old timers here, you guys will remember that the best early boost was Elrond, because Elrond came and they said, yeah, we'd love to have the Saito arcade with Elrond. And we're like, well, we'd love to give that to you. And they actually did way more for us at that time than Dot was doing. Like Dot, it's a big project. It's great to be affiliated and associated with them, but I mean, they don't really kind of get what's happening. The Elrond guys, they do. So the Web3 crypto, I think, is the most important thing for us in terms of stepping up with marketing, because it moves a lot of these partnerships out of the theoretically we're working with them, and it moves us right towards our model of now there's an edge node that's running Elrond. And if, the reason you're going to use that edge node is because you want to use their token with our applications. And then rinse and repeat with other cryptos. So yeah, I think that's kind of the appropriate time. And I think that's what we should look for as a marketing strategy too. Richard might have a different opinion, but he's back. And that's everything Richard didn't want you to hear.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's why I left, so that David could have his own way. And let's see if I can switch to the better camera here.
Heck yeah, I'm disappointed. You weren't Slackware, Red Hat's so corporate. Yeah, we did a bunch. We did the Saito Rust. We did the Polkadot.
Okay.
You want to move down to mobile smartphone site?
Okay, so we've answered that one. I can actually click through.
We answered Burn. We didn't do extra community developers if you want to do that.
Yeah.
I answered the Polkadot, the Saito Rust.
Okay.
One.
Polkadot one, I think the main thing for me is you can't actually build on Polkadot. You have to bring your own infrastructure to build the website, etc. All you get is the smart contract or the parachain. It's not going to run your website for you. That's where Cyto is really different.
I went games with NFTs. I actually think that's more practical for us. But
I think that's a huge thing, and it's a real nexus. There's a whole space there. Okay, I think I said most of what I would want to say about extra community developers. I think when I was looking before, we have spoken to people about building just about everything, and I think that's the strength, is that you can. There's a lot of people just looking for a blockchain to build things on, and you can come up with a reasonable model for almost any kind of software, whether that's ERP, track and trace for logistics, whether it's a game. Some really cool NFT game ideas we've had of trading card games and those sorts of things where the NFTs, you sort of play for them, swap them, those kinds of things. So yeah, there's really a huge amount of things that you can do. And the strength of Cyto is it'll support other cryptos doing that in ways that won't work on natively on chain. No one's going to play a game where it's going to cost you $280 in fees on BSC, let alone the 40,000 it would cost on ETH to play the game to the end. So I think that's really most of what I'd say about that one.
Yeah, let's keep going. I mean,
if Saito was an animal,
it's a cat.
Yeah, it's a cat.
It's gotta be. Mobile smartphone site main use case. Yeah, it's weird. I think it has to be, and I think we got to put work focused on that. The game components, we've kind of tried to design them to do both. The one issue is that the stuff people have played, the big ones at the start were Poker and Twilight Struggle. And like word blocks is super hard to play on your phone.
Right. I think
and
we have lost David for a second now, but hopefully I'm still here. I think for me, absolutely. I mean, for apps and games and things, we need to be more mobile focused. And the good thing there is, I hope I'm not speaking over him. I think the big thing there is really looking at those SDKs and stuff and making sure we handle all of the different development modes. That's amazing. So other people can hear David, but I can't. I'm getting that from me. I'm not sure if I should be speaking. Okay, I'll just say this. I think one thing that maybe people forget is, that originally a lot of the stuff that we built, or the approach that we took with Cyto, was building things like the arcade, both to test the network, but also to prove to other people what was possible. And developing quickly for browser demonstrated a lot of things were possible that people weren't even sure you could really do with a blockchain. So that's kind of the history there, and I think there's a lot of things that people look at and they assume are a choice not to do something, like we're anti-mobile or something like that, when it's really been a time and resourcing thing that, okay, we've proved that you can do these things, and we've built incredibly feature-rich applications in some of the games on chain, and they work to an extent on mobile, but no, we haven't given that the kind of attention that we think it would need to be massive. I'm going to stop there and refresh on my side, see if I can get back into the stream correctly, and maybe let David take over on that one.
Yeah, if your mobile experience sucks, that's partly my fault. Richard is actually way better at it, and I've been learning some good CSS from him. But it's kind of like, we put out the first version, and then you learn how it sucks from using it and getting frustrated. And so if you take a look at things like Red Imperium, now you'll see like a lot of the games are getting shared components, like the log that slides in from the side, and like the HUD with the transparent cards, and like the player boxes in poker and stuff. And now the player boxes, you can have like tiny menus in them. So all of that stuff is just iterating, because we'd like build a game and we'd run into a problem and we'd be like, well, we need to do it this way. And part of the challenge of iterating is realizing that like a lot of the stuff on mobile, the user interface is hard to nail. And we need something that works reasonably well on desktop and mobile. There's also some interesting combinations that aren't either, which are things like, if you guys check out boltpoker.net, there's the possibility for like Saito as a supporting tool for in-person multiplayer games, right? Where like we get you all have your phone, and your phone has the cards on it, and you've got an iPad, or you've got a television that shows the river and the flop and stuff. So yeah, we're working on it. We're aware of it. It depends how good we can get it. I think with Dan and like the UI, UX people we've got coming on, we'll have more resources to do this. How many total games are planned for the arcade? In particular, will there be Settlers of Catan? Well, I'm pleased to disappoint you guys, because there will not be Settlers of Catan. We're not doing Settlers of Catan because we're doing a generic island settling game that is non-infringing and does not have any legal issues. And I certainly hope that our community does not confuse things by going out and proclaiming to the world that we have Settlers of Catan, because we will not have Settlers of Catan. We may have Settlers of Satoa. We may be changing the name entirely to something that is not going to confuse anyone, because we don't want to confuse anyone. And also, if I can point out, the game sucks if you have to do a digital version of Catan, because the trading mechanism and a bunch of these tiny things are just awful. Like, you stop at everyone's turn, and everyone's like, do you have one lumber? And you go in a circle, and then nobody takes it, and you go, okay, well, do you have 2 lumber? And it's just an awful game. So, when we're looking at things, we're looking at things that, 1, we can do, 2, that we can improve. And I think if you take a look at the games in the arcade, you're going to see a span of things. You're going to see card games, because we experimented with those. You're going to see board games, 2-player board games. We've got some bigger player board games. I think the advantage of something like an island settling game is people know how to play it, and it's kind of leading people into the more advanced stuff that we're putting, which is often the much more addictive stuff. What I'm interested in addition to an island settling game, is I'm also interested in things like MT Gox and those kind of games, because those are quite easy for us to build given what we've got. And I think there's a lot more integration with like the NFT side and finding a supporting blockchain to partner with on that sort of thing. So there's a lot that's happening. And I think we're expecting that to be pushed around by the UX UI guys. For something like a card game of that sort, I think it's the design stuff that's really the hard part. Richard, are you hearing me? You want to?
Yeah, I seem to be in the stream properly now, so I'm just enjoying the fact that I'm back part of the meeting. Yeah, I think the key thing there is the opportunity to look at the board game type space. That is underrepresented. Lots of people are doing very low end kind of just participation games that are barely a game, or thinking gaming, and they're after the big, the console market kind of thing. And where there's a massive nexus, I think, is things like NFTs and crypto value. So there's obviously the gaming side, the gambling side, for anyone who's interested in pursuing that. But there's also like I was saying before, things like trading games or playing collectible games where, winning, sort of things more like the logic behind Pokemon Go or Magic the Gathering, that kind of thing, where participation, you can actually win and then obtain more things. And I was actually talking to a guy this morning, who I'll raise that conversation with David later in the week, from a group who do algorithmic stable coins that are also looking at really interesting stuff that could be worked into game mechanics to make that stuff possible. So to create value between games that's consistent enough that you could have different decks. So you could have a thing where anyone can come and create an NFT card set that can be introduced into a gaming universe without having inflation and things like that, which is really interesting. And I think the kind of thing that's exciting. And really, like I was saying before, the arcade and things like that, people often take as the front product or something like that. They came about for reasons of demonstrating just what Cyto can do. And those are the places where it's, the arcade still has a use in introducing Cyto to people and to creating traffic for testing against, making sure what we build really works with real users. But to take that arcade space to the next level, the thing to do is not just to make replicas of other things, but rather to look at how we can start breaking some new ground in the space around these kinds of ideas, like stuff you can only do P2P, stuff that where value is being created and people really care about it. And the cryptographic security comes in as well. And there's whole worlds of, it's a huge crypto space out there. There are people with really great ideas and things out there. Hopefully we can bring solutions to infrastructure and connecting people to those sorts of people building interesting stuff and go from there. And to me, that's what's super exciting long term.
Yeah, there's like a weird nexus between board gaming and like the game publishing industry in general when it comes to software and open source stuff, like the Basel project. We've got this TS mod, which is legal because the company that did it is licensed it. So and then meanwhile, like it's super easy with the arcade to kind of churn out card games and stuff. So we'll see what works and what doesn't. We're not the only ones interested in building games, but what I'd love is for us to get web generic crypto integration, and then game publishers start saying, wait a minute, you mean like you guys will help us put up a version that we can charge Bitcoin for or something? Because I'd love it. Like maybe that's like this weird niche thing that just grabs a sector of the industry, where all of a sudden, like a game publisher, we can get their game on, people can play it in the browser, it's ad supported, and they've got a business model that is not dependent on Steam, on people forking out money like out of pocket because it's ad subsidized. And that encourages the people, like, because like board game publishing companies are tiny sometimes. These are like the underdogs and the good guys. So I'd love it for us to be able to be more supportive of them and give them a business model that's not like drowning because Apple wants 30% of some ad revenue business or something. Let's move on. Richard, you want to pick the next one?
Making a show of new hires and updating the team page. Yep, we're on it. The biggest thing with updating the team page is we kind of need to hire the team to do the updating. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there, but yeah, we're definitely looking at doing that. Expanding the team is critical, I think, with the clarity we have in the roadmap and how we're moving ahead. So I think that's really most of what we can say about that is, yeah, we get it, we're on it, and the team is growing and expanding.
Why don't we kind of push through things really quickly? Because it's kind of creeping on.
No, we're getting nearly there. Merch, there's merch stuff coming. I'm looking at options to make it more generally available for people who want it. I'm getting more and more questions about this. So yes, merch will happen in big and small ways. So there's some cool stuff coming up there. Other things we wanted to just jump on quickly, David?
I can answer things really quickly. The quantum computing thing. I've read Bruce Schneier, Applied Cryptography. I believe him when he says that it's not really apocalyptic, it's increasing key size. So there are some things that this means. I'm being attacked by cats. We can increase key size easily. I think ATR might provide us with a mechanism also for over time insisting that people upgrade their keys. I think there's a process for it. I don't think it's apocalyptic. I think that quantum in crypto is a buzzword concept. Richard?
I'm a big for the same thing. And in fact, the funny thing is, if you look at Cyto, aside from the fact that the routing paths and the transactions might get bigger because we're doing more signing and bigger keys and bigger signatures, which is a small technical issue, and there are ways around that. Cyto's actually, with ATR, with the transient chain, in a far better position to upgrade and not have to carry legacy and things. You're going to have some really weird things built into something like Bitcoin, where it could keep going, but it's going to have to do a weird kind of internal checkpoint where it says, well, here's some hashes that have to be true on the old thing, and now you could actually start using the old keys, but to prevent that from all unraveling, we're going to build like a hash of the whole blockchain into the new blockchain after we introduce a key size from a certain time, and they can kind of survive, but it's nasty. With Cyto, we could just have a point at which we say, from here on in, once you go round again, you're there.
You don't need to. You don't need to have all these if this block do that, which is littering the Bitcoin. Final thing to point out to you maybe is that, like, in an apocalyptic quantum computing dystopia, you want the most scalable blockchain you can, because maybe you need to send 1 megabyte big keys. And if that's the case, you want a scalable blockchain, and that's what Cyto is. And so maybe it's quantum computing makes volunteer networks unfeasible. Well,
that's good for us. I think the other thing is, we'll see it coming. There's a sort of sense of when quantum computing, like somehow we'll all suddenly have quantum computers, or at least there'll be 12 of them, and everyone's chains will be being attacked.
Challenge is, if you upgrade key sizes, upgrade key sizes, people need to rebroadcast. I think there are ways to do it. Richard, do you want to take the ATR mechanism and Saito tokens off chain?
Okay. The big thing there is simply that we have to make sure that we have the quantity of wrapped tokens secured and managed through Treasury that's keeping those on chain. It's not really a big issue. We just need to make sure that those UTXOs are always in the appropriate spot that is allocated to the address that owns the wrapped tokens.
We specifically also, let me just chime in, we specifically have the ability to say the tokens that are in here are in this one specific transaction as it rolls around. We have a transaction type dedicated for that purpose, that kind of purpose, saying this UTXO lasts forever. Yeah.
And there are only certain conditions where you could do that, but this is a perfect place
Yeah.
to say that.
Like
I
created
think
and
long
eventually
term,
by the master server, which is this. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And the reason for that is I think there's a long-term need for this kind of facility because we, you know, will be wanting to integrate other currencies, and for them to have simple ways to have fees, no user's going to want to pay gas in another crypto. So we're going to need to make sure that there are really simple ways for applications in another ecosystem to have their tokens be worth Cyto fees in Cyto, and wrapping is an excellent way of doing that. So then there's a long future for that. It's not just an interim measure.
Let's push through them. Richard,
Yeah.
what do you think?
I think there's actually a nice little point in this joke one about no free riders. And that's something I can just jump on here and say, yeah, I think there's actually more to that than the kind of like, oh, there's two meanings of free rider here. It's actually true. Because of the economic model in Cyto, it doesn't permit us to do things like, I was looking at the exact mechanics and can we do a syrup pool easily on DOT? On PancakeSwap. And no, we can't, because slushing tokens around in the way that kind of a lot of DeFi projects does undermines the long-term economy. There are no free riders and there's no ability to create them either. What's going to create value in the system is real value creation through doing things like routing transactions for people or providing liquidity, etc. So yeah, in Cyto there are no free riders. And that's kind of an across-the-board thing. What that takes away in kind of simple DeFi, kind of fun and games, it adds in total long-term value 100 times over. So that's really where we're at. Right, we're actually up over the hour. I'm not sure. I think David's gone to get a cat. We should probably make sure we have at least one cat sighting in a Cyto event. So let me kind of have the great question there about what people can do to help Cyto grow. I think the biggest thing is participating in community and getting the word out. People starting to understand what Cyto does and achieves is, I think, the biggest thing that anyone can do across the board. And in addition to that, I think we will be adding staff on to help make that more of a reality. All right. I think that's kind of probably enough for the evening, and we've covered most of the upvoted questions. The other ones, I think, are repeaters from other spots.
The only one I'd answer is guys. I think that's an interesting question. What potential edge cases could happen later on, and how will you be preventing them from happening?
Right, I didn't see that one.
Let me answer this is maybe in a big picture, because I think this is one of the really interesting things about Cyto. The question's kind of asked, I think, sometimes as a gotcha, like, well, what's wrong? This is one of the reasons we want a lot of eyes on the consensus mechanism. But let me tell you something that's really powerful about what we're doing. Security in Cyto in some ways comes from deflation. It comes from ripping tokens away from people in the consensus mechanism itself. And one of the things I just want to flag is, like, you can think of the attacker, they're spending tokens and the tokens are either not being collected by them, like one of our problems is if the tokens fall off the chain and they come back and they go back to the attacker. So one of the really interesting things that we have the ability to do, and it's one of these things where we want more eyes on consensus, in part because we want people to be starting to suggest this stuff and help us explore the contours, is if we can surface information about when attacks are happening, we can actually have consensus start burning more and more money. And we can get the cost of attack above 100%, above 125%, above 150%. And to me, this is the most interesting thing about what we're doing in terms of the potential for the network long term, in terms of like a roadmap that we're not even sure necessarily what's there. Like, we can do things like have a staking mechanism where block producers have to stake extra Cyto to produce blocks. And if they produce 2 at the same block depth, or if someone else produces a second block with the same level of work with a certain number of the same transactions, that proof can be submitted to then burn the Saito that they've staked. All of these kind of proof of stake staking mechanisms we can have too. The important thing is that when we burn the tokens, we got to burn them for good. So the double answer there is one, as you look at the roadmap and what we're doing, realize that we're doing it because we want more people aware of how Cyto works. And I think the OGs will realize how hard that actually is, because you guys will have seen us go and engage with people. You'll have seen people ask directly and they just don't know how to answer because they don't understand Cyto. They've never worked through it, or it's just too hard for them. But the second is there are some really interesting things we can do. One of the things that gets me interested really long-term for exploring that I don't personally really understand yet is in what situations can we ramp up the amount of tokens that the network is burning? You know, like if the burn fee starts speeding up, we could start doing things like saying, well, you know, there's an extra cost all of a sudden. You know, 25% of the tokens we burnt because you went over a limit and we think the network is under attack. And this is the sort of thing that we can do that other networks can't really effectively do. So it's not just risk, it's also opportunity. And, you know, I'm hoping that as we grow, we get more and more people thinking about this and giving us feedback and help also, because we do have a long development roadmap and we could use it. Richard?
I think particularly on that one, I think you've covered it. I'm just looking at a couple of other things in here that maybe are worth answering, but maybe we should just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I'm going to head over to the Telegram community now and hang around for another half hour or so,
Okay.
and answer questions there. I think that's always fun and enjoyable to do. So why don't we wind up here and keep the conversation going in Telegram. And you know, feel free to drop in there and let us know anytime. Other than that, record numbers here tonight as well. I think we peaked out at just under 100 folks on the call, which is fantastic. I do like the "I hate this project" free rider comment. And we'll probably we'll see you guys again in a month or so. So maybe around New Year. I think probably just after would be the likely next time. David looks like he might be reading or typing into chat.
Yes,
Otherwise,
I am. I'll come over to TG, but I've got to bail in about 10. Guys, thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry for the scatterbrainness, particularly from me after that annoying was a browser and then network crash. I think they might have been related. So glad to have gotten in for the last bit of the call. All right, thanks, everyone. I'll wind it up here.